Virtually every country in the world. That's a fact. Take South Asia, for example, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangla, Bhutan, Maldives. You can't think of a country that has not been impacted by English law. The world has two systems of law. One is the common law, English law. The other one is the civil law, the Roman law. But out of the both, the bigger impact came from the English law. One reason could be the empire, the British Empire, the so-called largest empire ever in the history of mankind. But it's not just that. Involvement in their literature, arts, education, so many things contributed to the making of the British law and its influence on the world today. But okay, the purpose of the lesson is not just that, exactly how it started. How did it particular English law develop it into being what it is today? So that's the purpose of it. So the first thing is, okay, how did it kind of came into being? Started with the Romans. 43 AD means around, let's say, around 1900 years ago. So then the Roman Empire was mighty, huge, and you could see the expanse of the Roman Empire. And one part of the Roman Empire was the Britannia. They call it Britannia, actually. They never captured the entirety of the modern England, but they captured the England part of the Britain today. So the Romans contributed to the creating of their original systems, the towns. Written records started. The early rules began, of course, under the Roman law. They had problems with the Scottish from the very early days, so they could never defeat the Scots, and the Scots kept on attacking the Roman-controlled parts of so-called Britannia, and they made up a wall here. We call it the Hadrian Wall. The wall is still visible today here to prevent the Scots from attacking England. So Roman, for all their might, was not able to control the entirety of the British Islands. But then Romans created the first magistrate system. I think they were the first in the world to do that. First in the UK, definitely. This praetor would hear the civil cases like the land, custody, marriage, perhaps, and they followed the Roman law, of course. So this system prevented the systems like blood feud. What's the meaning of that? I mean, I kill you, I kill one of yours, and you come and you have the right to come and one of mine. So that was the older practices of, the settlers in England. But then the Roman law, Romans introduced their systems a lot, right? So we can call it Roman law, helped, to create the first realistic system in then Britannia. And the language used, well, Latin. After that, yeah, the Romany ended about 400 or so years. Roman landed, but then the Germanic tribes. You can see the pictures, right? The Saxons, the Jews. Most of the modern movies, so the hero stories are all based on this Saxon, regalia, literally. They made such an influence on England, but latter day into the rest of the world as well. They came from modern day Denmark, northern Germany area. Saxons, the Angles, Germanic tribes, we call them. Germany of then was a huge area, far bigger than what is today. They took over Britannia, or the modern day England, by defeating the Romans And their influence into the England was pivotal, huge. Language, the laws, the culture, a lot changed, uh, developed thanks to the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It was never a singular kingdom under the Anglo-Saxons. They captured different parts and different rulers were there. During that time, the Wales was independent, Scotland was still independent. So they came in different invasions, and they modified the existing Roman system, right? Created a judicial system called the wergild. Purpose was compensation for every crime, every wrong. You have to pay compensation, and of course, if you can't pay compensation for the wrong, then it's trial by ordeal, well, torture, physical punishment. So that was the Anglo-Saxon. They lasted until 1066. But then we had the Norman conquest. Now, there was another invasion, this time from France. They defeated the Saxons from Germania. Well, their rule still lasts to date. There were French rulers, the French kings. So they were still using Latin, by the way. And the thing was, they did not destroy that completely. They did not totally remove the Saxon laws. They kept some of it, but kept on introducing their own ones. They created a system called the traveling magistrates and laid the foundation for the creation of the common law. That means the traditions and the practices of the people creating the laws. So they were a little bit more advanced in depending on the people's way of life, more than even the Romans as well as the Saxons. Magisterial system was there, as I told you, the traveling magisterial system. They created inheritance laws. That means how do you kind of own property from your parents or the ones before them. But they still have things like the trial by combat and the forest laws. That means, the feudal lords had the right to the forest. And the murderum, that means if you harm a feudal lord, the entire village was punished. So the brutality of this, yeah, but the development of the law started. So that was 1066. If you look at Sri Lankan history, that's at the start of the Polonnaru era, and thereafter the Magna Carta. Now the Normans were the last of the large invasions, and they established themselves. So the modern England has a direct linkage to the Norman traditions. So by 1215, that means over 200 years after the arrival of British, at that time the barons, that means regional law lords, let's call them regional rulers. We had a king at the time of England, but then the law lords forced the king to come up with a system of civil rights. That was the very first Western conceptual development of civil rights. We call it Magna Carta. Here you can see the original document itself. Here the King James put his signature to the Magna Carta. Yeah, semblance of fundamental rights. Some rules to prevent the king from enforcing unlawful laws, unlawful taxes from the people were imposed. So it literally checked, controlled king's power. And the law lords had a semblance of a higher degree of independence from the king. So that laid the foundation for a less dictatorial king in England. So this is considered as the primary document when it comes to the modern Western concepts of constitutional freedoms. And thereafter, of course, we had the terrible eras of, the Black Death, killing over 50 million people in Europe, a huge number of people in England as well. This led to the destruction of the feudalism. What's feudalism? That means technically the law lords owns a particular region, and the people have to work in the region by working for free to this particular regional ruler. The regional ruler gives them the land to work on, but the money regional ruler gets. And whenever the ruler needs an army, the people have to fight for him free. So that's the kind of feudalism. But then with the Black Death, with a huge number of people dying, that feudalistic rule of England started to collapse, because there were no longer a possibility of the lords to take care of the people. And the people did not have to depend on the Lord, because the suffering that the people are going through, the Lord could not do anything to help them, unlike in the past. So then the people moved away from the lords or the regional rulers' controls, little by little by little. So this also a huge step in, the latter day developments. When we had the English Reformation, this is a pretty much of a historic king for England, King Henry VIII. Why is he historic? Well, he was a pretty tough ruler. His brutalities were very much known. He's said to have killed 6 or 7 of his own wives for not being able to create children for him. But keeping that aside, he was the one who created the Church of England. He didn't want to pay taxes to the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Pope. So he refused to pay and refused Catholicism, created the English Reformation. Him as the head of the Church of England, so-called the English Church. The Church of England has had influence in Sri Lanka, so a lot of our education, the Protestant Anglican churches of Kandy, as well as in other places, right, are direct connections to the Church of England and the Parliament Reformation. So as well as the king being the one in charge of religion, played a huge role in the development of the UK as a modern society. Until that time in Europe, the church had huge powers. Generally, that led to negative results. But the king getting the power and the king being under the control of the parliament created a system where the church had to abide by the parliamentary rules. Of course, during his early eras, he was pretty brutal towards the Catholics, and most of the Catholics escaped England, avoiding the king's pogroms, and ended up in America. But later, the religious pluralism, that means giving people the right to follow own religion, was more and more in practice. So this checking of the church and increasing the powers of the parliament contributed to the later development of England. Then we had the Civil War, the Glorious Revolution. There was a king called Charles I. He was not exactly happy about the increasing powers of the parliament. King wanted to recover the power back. So once there was this battle between the parliament's forces and the king's forces, resulting in the defeat of the king. And then the parliament simply captured the king, brought him to the parliament and executed him, cut his head actually. And thereafter, for a little while, so this is the execution order against the king, signed by the members of parliament, right? For treason, that means being against the parliament, waging a war against the parliament. So after that, further increases the powers of the parliament, further cut down the powers of the king, created the English Bill of Rights and the monarchy. The king became a constitutional king. That means a king without power. And ever since then, and this happened when? 1600s. Ever since then, that has been the truth of England as it is. The powerless king and the full powerful, all powerful parliament. And yes, later the Industrial Revolution came up where this literally killed off the peasant society, or the agrarian society of UK. Factories came into being and townships became cities. People moved by the millions from the villages to the towns. And the production of a mass scale started. It all began in UK within just a 70-80 year period, close to 100 years period. Industrial Revolution changed the world, and it changed Britain before the world. And Britain was the first industrial nation. And with it came the need for laws like the workers' rights, the company laws, the corporate practices, the business laws. All those things came with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, the start of the British Empire. You might think that the British Empire was created by the kings. No, it was created by the Parliament. Parliament created the British Empire, not the kings. Kings had nothing to do with it. In order to obtain the resources to run the kingdom and to compete with the other empires like the Spanish and the French kingdoms, Britain started capturing territories. This is not exactly the complete truth size of the British Empire. British Empire did control the eastern side of America as well. The map does not show that, because this was America became free in 1776. So this is the size of the empire after that. Even until 1945, much of these territories were under British control. Thereafter, of course, after the Second World War, a lot of these territories were given freedom by the British Parliament, mind you. So the king was a non-entity when the British Empire was being built by the Parliament. That means the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and then, yes, the rest of it. The empire on which the sun never sets. It is literally possible for a person to walk from northern Africa to the southern tip of America, right across British controlled territories. This map is not exactly correct in size. Africa is much larger than it shows here, right? Russia looks much bigger than it shows here. So that's a twisting due to the curvature of the earth. So the Britain captured and had control over huge territory, including South Asia, including Sri Lanka. And multiple islands, thousands of islands straddling, Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. Some of these islands still are controlled by Britain even to date. So the creation of the empire resulted in the empire having to be ruled with a single system of practice, single legal system, and the single set of structure for the court. So what was going on in England at the time for the laws, Britain basically duplicated in everywhere they went. The court structure, the laws, criminal to civil, the principles. Some practices they adapted from the local customs. Take a look at the Sri Lankan law. British were willing to accept the parts of the Kandyan law, the Tesavalama law, and the the Muslim law, and they took a sizable part of the Roman Dutch law also, which was introduced to us by the Dutch when the Dutch were ruling Sri Lanka before them. But all in all, the majority of the Sri Lankan law became British, and just like ours, entire empire, so-called the largest empire ever, started following the English ways of laws, English ways of practice. So that was a worldwide spread the beginning of it with the creation of the empires. And okay, what about the cases that come up in these far corners of the world coming under the British control? Well, they were brought before a council or a court in UK called the Privy Council. Privy Council became the final court for the entire empire. So people could appeal to the Privy Court for justice from anywhere in the world. Then the war came. First World War, and thereafter the Second World War. Wars destroyed England, Britain, made it very much weaker. And America came up as the dominant power, along with Russia. Britain, as well as the other empires, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, they all declined. Empire became too difficult to govern. Although Britain won the war with the support of America, it was America that gained maximum advantage from the end of the wars. So by this time, there were lots of migrations into Britain. Britain became a multicultural society. And more the people are demanding their own rights, like the suffrage, right of women to vote, and the universal suffrage for men and women both, individual rights, civil rights, industrial and social rights. So many other things came up within a very short time. The British Parliament kept on passing laws to face a fast changing world, fast changing UK. So, given time, by the end of 1945, the British Parliament started giving freedom to much of the captured territories of the empire because it was not possible to govern any longer. Britain was a poorer nation after the wars. First World War, 1914, and thereafter, 1939 war. So this is the creation, or rather, development of the British law from the ancient times to this. Now, why is this important? Not just the laws. Virtually every professional practice in the world has had an impact from British UK legal system. Their court decisions are still followed. The laws passed by the British Parliament is still being followed by almost every other nation in the world as a standard bearer. So anyone who's learning a UK model study, a westernized model of education, needs to have a solid understanding of the way of the English law as well, in order to perfect his field of study, no matter what it is. Catch you in another video.